In the last chapter we read, Beowulf against Grendel, chapter 6, we left off with Beowulf um, pretty much pulling Grendel's arm out of its socket. Or I should say, kind of Grendel was like reeling around. So Grendel kind of pulled his own arm out of his socket. Um, and the next chapter is titled Celebrations, chapter 7. So what do you think happened after the whole scene of Grendel's arm being pulled out of its socket? Go ahead and make a prediction. What's going to happen in this chapter? It's titled Celebrations. What are they celebrating? The monster howled. It was a pandemonium of pain, as though all the men he had eaten cried out too. He dragged himself along the ivory floor, blood pumping from his wound with each fierce beat of his angry heart. He knew he must die from loss of blood. Beowulf let Grendel go. He listened to the hideous howling dying away from the fen. The light grew stronger. The sun lit all the windows of Hall Heorot. Beowulf's men crowded around him. He was some it was some little time before they realized the full intent of their hero's victory. Beowulf was bruised and bloody, and his cheeks were thick with slime off the monster's body. But when he hung Grendel's torn arm from a hook in the rafters, all the Geats burst out cheering. It was foul and green and scaly, with a tangle of blood-soaked hair at the wrist and sharp claws where the fingers should have been. Nobody liked to touch it, but everyone looked. Beowulf acknowledged the congratulations wearily. He called for water. It was brought. He washed the blood and dirt from his body and combed his hair. Then he went to Unferth. Unferth, alone, ignored, skulked under the great throne. His teeth were chattering. His eyes went to and fro. He kept trying to drink from an empty horn. But when Beowulf laid a friendly hand on his shoulder to comfort him, he turned and snapped at it like a wolf. "Murder," he snarled. "You killed him. He was beautiful, and you killed him." And he began to sob and rock, cradling knees in his hands. So why do you think this character likes Grendel? What do you think is his reason for liking Grendel? Go ahead and type in the chat. Why do you think Unferth likes Grendel? The astonished Geats roared disapproval. Beautiful? He said the beast was beautiful? Some of them wanted to take ungrateful Unferth out and hang him from the nearest tree. But Beowulf told them to leave the wretch to himself. To Unferth, Grendel was beautiful, was all he would say when the men asked him why. "Here comes Hrothgar," called one by the ruined door. The king could not believe what Beowulf had done. He stood in Heorot and stared at the terrible trophy, Grendel's arm, which still dripped steaming blood on the ivory floor. As for Wealhtheow, she came to Beowulf with open arms and tears in her sky-blue eyes. He knelt before her, and she kissed him tenderly on the forehead. The sun seemed to dance over the land of the Danes. An exultation of larks rose from the fen itself. They went up, 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 trilling dew from their wings, and busily rested and sang and sang. King Hrothgar clapped his hands. "Clean the hall," he shouted to the servants. "Scrub the tables, polish the benches, hang the walls with the richest tapestries. Bring meat and mead enough for a man as strong as 100 men. All this for Beowulf. Honor to Beowulf. Long live Beowulf, who has freed us from the monster Grendel." They raced their horses, they made poems and songs, they told stories of all of the heroes that ever lived, and said their deeds were small compared to what brave Beowulf had done in a single night. Hrothgar gave Beowulf gifts, and the gifts were these: a banner of gold, a helmet that would not break, a sword as sharp as a flame. He also made him a present of 8 of his swiftest horses, each horse decked with a golden bridle, and saddle encrusted with precious stones. And Wealhtheow gave Beowulf a ring of the purest gold to wear on his finger, and a golden collar to carry around his neck. This collar, some say, was called a brasigimon and was the most perfect thing in the world. So, in this chapter, we went through a couple stages in the hero's journey, or a couple steps. What steps did Beowulf go through in the hero's journey so far? The feasting went on for 3 days and 3 nights. Only Unferth held apart from it, sitting in a dark corner, twisting his cloak in his hands, muttering of Grendel's beauty, and prophesizing doom. No one paid any attention to him. Once Beowulf offered him a drink, but Unferth spat it out. I want blood, he said. Of the stories told by Hrothgar's poets, all in honor of Beowulf's feat, and meant to provide comparisons with what he had done, the one that made the deepest mark on Beowulf's mind was the story of Sigemund and the fire dragon. This is how it went. Long ago, there was a prince called Sigemund who was a great hero. He was strong as a bear and tall as a mountain tree. He could snap chains round his chest simply by taking a big breath, and bend iron bars that it took 2 men to lift. Because he used his giant strength only in the service of good, he was always a very popular man. Everyone loved him. None loved Sigemund more than his loyal nephew, Fitela. Fitela was an would Fitela was as unlike his uncle as it is possible for 2 men to be. He was small in stature, timorous, and shy by nature. Men said that Fitela would run away from his own shadow if Sigemund was not with him. However, this never happened because Sigemund was always with him. The two of them were inseparable. They fought together, drank together, prayed together. You never saw huge Sigemund, but you saw little Fitela, taking 6 strides to keep up with his uncle's one, peering askance at murky places, tugging at the giant's sleeves, and offering him all sorts of useless advice in a high, squeaky voice. Together they performed many great deeds, brave deeds. Nor was puny Fitela as good for nothing in battle as you may think. He could skip through an enemy's legs and trip him up in a trice, while the man was still concentrating on Sigemund as his only opponent. He could hang on to horses' tails and make them rear, tumbling their riders to the ground, where it was easy enough for Sigemund to finish them off. He had great value as an impish wreaker of havoc and a line of hostile soldiers, for he had only to hop about in front of them, pulling faces, and then race round the back and shout a few names. Milk chops, skelly bum, barmy sword, hey you with the woolly eyebrows growing out of your ears, to reduce the most well-disciplined squad to an angry confusion that left them with no chance as soon as Sigemund came on the scene. In any kind of adventure, Sigemund and Fitela thus proved themselves as an unbeatable pair. The killing of the fire dragon was an exploit that called for the best of their cunning. The dragon was guardian of a treasure hoard so vast and valuable that they knew it would bring prosperity to the land for generations to come. For this reason, they were determined to slay it and take the treasure if they could. Now, the fire dragon lived on an island of silver rock. It had 4 heads. The first one, as white as snow, breathed out air. The second head, which was black as pitch, coughed up earth. The third head, sea green, was more terrible than either of these. It spat out great quantities of water. The fourth head was the most horrible head of all. It was flamed colored with bulging, blood red eyes. This head could spit out long forks of searing fire, burning everything to cinders within a range of about half of a mile. Nothing grew on Silver Rock Island because the dragon hated trees and flowers, and as soon as the least green shoot appeared anywhere, he would turn his fourth head to glare at it and whoosh, crack, fry it into bits in one of his tremendous fire spits. So let's talk about the fire dragon. So he has 4 heads. Name what one head can do. So what's a characteristic of one of the fire dragon's heads? Go ahead and type that in the chat. Sigismund and Fitela had to work out a plan to get near the dragon in the first place. They did it all night, swimming underwater, approaching Silver Rock Island from different directions. Sigismund swam slowly, stopping every now and again to surface and lie on his back, sending tall spurtles of water out of the waves. The fire dragon, which slept only 3 heads at a time, so that one pair of eyes was always on the lookout, thought it was just a whale playing in the moonlight, and took no notice. Meanwhile, Fautella had reached the rock from the north. Being so small, he was able to crawl up behind the dragon without being seen. Sigismund dived down to the seabed again and swam quickly toward the island. Little Fitella was crouched right by the dragon's tail. As soon as he saw big telltale bubbles indicating that his uncle was about to emerge from the sea, he grabbed the tail boldly in both hands and twisted it as hard as he could. The dragon roared with anger. It turned its terrible fourth head to see and destroy whatever the impudent thing was that dared to tweak its tail. It was astonished by Fitella's smallness. Sigismund took good advantage of that moment of astonishment. He heaved himself up on the silver rock and hurled himself at the dragon. The head that breathed out air lunged at him. Sigismund seized it by the throat and twisted it around. Air came hissing from the head just as the fire began to fork from the other one. Fitella would have been burned alive if the flames had reached him, but they did not reach him. Sigismund had locked the 2 heads together, so the fire was beaten down by the dragon's windpipe, by the blast of air from its other mouth. It wreathed and coughed. Fitella pulled at its tail. Again, the dragon tried to get its fire-throwing head in position to deal with him, but Sigismund grabbed another head, the black one, already coughing up cartloads of earth, and bent the tough neck in its powerful hands, ramming it into the jaws where fire struggled to get the better of air. Dark, heavy soil poured down the dragon's throat. His eyes, red eyes, popped out of his head as he choked on it. Fitella twisted the dragon's tail once more. Sigismund added the water-squirting head to the complicated knot he had already made out of the dragon's 3 other heads. The forks of flame, met by air, earth, and a great flood of water, had no chance to get out. The fire traveled down into the dragon's belly. He gave a fearful belch and died. In this way, Sigismund and Fitella won the fire dragon's treasure hoard for the good of their people. When they looked into the cave that had been his den, they found it crammed to the roof with gold and silver and diamonds and rubies and pearls. They loaded 10 ships with their plunder and sailed happily home. After this cunning adventure, the storyteller concluded that Sigismund and Fitella were famous the whole world over, but their deeds were as flea bites compared to Beowulf's, he added, putting down his harp. Beowulf laughed. He was amused and pleased by this tale, and stored it in his memory. Queen Wealhtheow poured the last of the wine into another golden goblet for him to drink from. Hrothgar had fallen asleep on his throne, his white-haired head against his polished shield. Soon all the lords and warriors followed suit. They were worn out with happiness. Danes and Geats sprawled side by side on the long, straight benches of the banqueting hall, content that Heorot was a safe place now, well satisfied with the celebrations that they had had in the hero's honor. The poet snored, sore-throated from so much storytelling. The servants dreamt of being masters. Beowulf slept too, his head on his hands, the golden collar glittering around his neck. Only Unferth remained awake. He stared at the arm which hung from the hook. His eyes were dry and bloodshot, full of black thoughts. What do you think Unferth might do? Go ahead and make a prediction in the chat. As Unferth is lying awake here, what do you think he might do?